Hello, welcome to the All or Nothing podcast. Our official sponsors are KR Couriers and Transport Limited. This is a Northwest based courier company delivering all across the UK. They can assist in home moves and removals to large, heavy and bulky items, collections and drop-offs. Fast, safe and reliable deliveries. Please get in touch for a free quote. You'll find all the information within the description. Thank you.
Hello everybody, welcome to the All or Nothing podcast with myself, Billy Moore, and today's special guest is Ged McCormick. Now I met Ged on Lodge Lane by chance. I was filming up them ways and you came out and you spoke to me and you had an interesting story to tell, you know what I mean, and I captured a little bit on film and shared it, and a lot of people showed a lot of interest and said, look, you know, I need to hear more from Ged. Can you get him on, get that guy on? So we spoke again because we did swap numbers that night anyway. And I'm curious as well. So tell us a little bit about yourself, please, Ged, so the audience can get to know who you are.
Okay. You've probably guessed I'm from Liverpool. I grew up in Liverpool. I spent most of my life in Liverpool. I've done lots of different jobs. I used to be an aerospace engineer. And then I left that, got into the arts, got into doing a bit of hitchhiking, travelling, and then got into a bit of teaching on a YTS scheme in Toxteth. That was my first introduction to working with kids with challenging behaviour. That was an eye-opener for me. Then I went off travelling again. I went to America, did a bit of teaching in America, did a bit of drama teaching in America, in Michigan, travelled around the States, come back. Didn't know what I was going to do. Ended up in London, working on a show about John Lennon with Mark McGann in the West End. That was fun. And I did a bit more travel. Come back to Liverpool, set up an actors cooperative with Martin Hughes, actually. Yeah. So kind of ups the daisy.
That was them demons.
So yeah, I've done many different jobs and I've travelled quite a bit, and I'm a very curious guy, Billy. And when I was an apprentice engineer, I remember distinctively asking lots of questions, because I was working with grown men. I was about 16, 17, and they were quite well paid, and you know, they travelled a lot, guys, and I was interested in what life was like outside of work and what it was like to get on a plane or to go to another country, or you know, to experience life a little bit. And anyone kind of older than me had experienced life and was a bit wiser than what I was. So I've always had a curious personality. I'm a curious man who tries to. I want to understand things. I want to know why. You know, what's it like? Why people do certain things, and that's never gone away from me. And then eventually, later on in life, my curiosity, my desire to know stuff, transformed me. Okay. As I said earlier, my family are from a pretty well-known working class area called Scotland Road, and you know, my mum and dad come from big families, so a big Catholic family background. My brother became a priest, and which is quite a big deal in a Catholic family. And I used to be a Roman Catholic. Okay, and what's interesting now is when I meet my family, usually at funerals, because obviously we're all getting on a bit. They ask me a question like, why aren't you a Catholic anymore? So I try and kind of explain what's happened to me, and, you know, why I'm not a practicing Catholic, why I'm what's called a born-again Christian, okay? And what that means, and I suppose give a little testimony about what happened to me, okay? And in a nutshell, what did happen to me was after I got married and I went to live in Ireland, and it was probably one of the best experiences of my life. I lived in Southern Ireland, a place called Cork, and it's also known as the Rebel County, where Michael Collins comes from. and I enjoyed the whole experience. And I came back to the UK. I had a 2-year-old son, and I went through a series of tragedies actually. And it's funny how God's got a sense of humour, I believe. And certain difficulties in life, later on, you can reflect and look back and kind of realise that they happen for a reason. And there's benefits, there's blessings in them. You know, for example, growing up in Liverpool, it's not necessarily the easiest place to grow up in. You know, and throughout my kind of 40 years of living here, I've been away for roughly 20 years, 40 years of living in Liverpool. I've met lots of people, I know, I can understand to a certain degree why we get a bit of bad press, because there are a few scallywags. There are people there who'll have you off, so to speak. I've been burgled several times, car smashed, broken into, got a smack for just walking down the wrong street at the wrong time. So, and plus also when I worked on the factory floor, I was a young, naive kid who got the mickey taken out of him. So, and it was, sometimes it was quite difficult. But that's the realities of growing up in a city like Liverpool, which I love, incidentally. I when I was away for 18 years, there's a lot about Liverpool. It did an impression till Black then. A lot about I like about Liverpool in terms of who we are, our warmth, our friendliness, our sense of humour, our creativity. There's an edge to us. And during the 80s, about 1985, I remember talking to a friend of mine who was involved in the theatre, and I said to him, John, he was from Birmingham, I said, why did you come to Liverpool? Because aren't we I was paranoid because of, what the media did for, Boys in the Black stuff, everyone, we had a bad name.
Portrayed.
That's right.
Portrayed
and, I was always intrigued then why anyone would want to come and live in Liverpool because of such bad press that we got, and a totally wrong representation of who we are as people. And he said to me, because of the people. He said, it's the warmth, the friendliness, the sense of humour. Yeah. Right. And I do believe we are, a kind of... I'm not just saying this, we are an exceptional group of people. We've got a lot of Irish heritage. My family, as I say, Scotland Road, McCormick, Fitzpatrick, and from the little family tree stuff I've done, I'm assuming that we came over during the potato famine. Okay, and when I lived in Ireland, I was interested to see the similarities between Liverpudlians and Irish people. And I lived in the rebel county, which was very interesting because I got history from the locals' perspective of actually what went on during the 1920s, and how the Irish folks, what they did in terms of rebelling against the oppression of the British Army and what have you. So I got a bit of an education into Irish history and who Michael Collins was, and watched the movie with Liam Neeson and a Liverpool actor called Ian Hart, who's part of Martin's friend. I know Ian a little bit from many years ago. Brilliant actor. He was in this film. So it was great for me to discover the similarities between me or us as Liverpudlians and Irish folk. I found Irish people, and still do. I've got lots of Irish friends here. They've got a great sense of humour, got a great bit of sarcasm, but they have a warmth about them and a friendliness, that I really treasure and value. So I've travelled a bit. I've lived away. I went through a series of tragedies. My mother died, then my dad died, then my marriage died, unfortunately, and I was homeless. And as I say, I had a 2-year-old son at the time, who I was caring for, and we split up, which is very traumatic for most people when you go through a relationship breakdown. So I was couch surfing back home in Liverpool, thinking, what am I going to do? Still in a state of trauma. And then I kind of thought, well, I've got to do something. So, and I want to spend some time with my son. So I went back to York, where I was living, and I started exploring work options. And the three things that I chose that I wanted to do was either become a stonemason, because I've always enjoyed working with my hands, you know, and trying to make things, you know. So I've got certain transferable skills and a skill set from the engineering days and doing other bits of carpentry and stuff. So I thought I'll be a stonemason. So I started to explore that. And then I started looking into working in an operating theatre as a kit man, where you get all the kit ready for an operation and you work with the, you know, the nurses and the doctors and the anaesthetists, and you know, get all the kit ready and you're part of the operation team, which I thought, that sounds really interesting and fascinating. Or to go back to school. I was 46 at the time. And when I say go back to school, I'm talking about university here. I didn't think that I wasn't sure whether I was bright enough to go back to school, but as it happened, I did a diploma in management studies, and that kind of got me into university. I decided to study filmmaking, because throughout the years in Liverpool, on and off, I'd what's the word I'm looking for? I'd periodically tapped into doing bits of telly and bits of film work, like bits of Brookside with Martin Hughes, actually. A bit of work with them, bit of acting, bit of lots of extra work with Ricky Tomo when he had his ART company, and occasionally bits of production work like dressing props or running, right? So, but it was too spasmodic, and you know, it wasn't enough to kind of earn a living. So I just thought, I'll do it properly. I'll go to film school. So I studied film and television production and documentary filmmaking and the media. And little did I know what that would be a catalyst for me in terms of transforming my life. So as a consequence of doing the film and TV production, and plus I was 46.
How old are you now?
I'm 63.
63.
Okay. You're supposed to say you don't look that, Bill.
No, you don't look that. You don't look that, Bill.
So yeah. So I you know, I've always had an appetite for learning stuff and knowledge and stuff, you know, but also practical stuff. Like here I am, just watching you set up here, talking about your background and doing this, because I've done a bit of this myself, you know. But usually I'm doing what you're doing. Usually I'm asking the questions. I'm working with a film photographer or director, etc. So what I found was at university, I loved the documentary film side of stuff, and plus, as I say, I was older than everyone else, and I was a little bit frustrated because I'm working with young kids who had no life experiences whatsoever. So eventually, after about 12 months, I went to my teachers, my professors, and said, "Can you put me with anyone who knows what they're doing?" So we said, yeah, okay. So they put me with some of the top talent at university, who were usually older students who had a gift for filmmaking. And I became an asset for them, because I became their fixer, their problem solver, their location manager, their producer, you know. And if they had any issues, I'd sort it out for them. So then I became a valuable asset to them. And then some of my mates, my contemporaries, there's a guy called Rudy Rivron Sanchez, who was my classmate, and, you know, big shout out to Rudy if he ever gets to watch this. But Rudy made his first film a couple of years ago, and he went on to create a new genre of film, and he's won countless. Every time I speak to him, it goes up. I said, how many awards have you won now? I think it was like 12 or 15 in his first movie. So we worked together I helped supported him on some of his, when he was cutting his teeth to music videos and stuff, and we became close friends, and still are. So yeah, university, I went to university to do filmmaking. And then something something happened. There was a series of events, okay, and one of them was because I studied documentary filmmaking. And we went right back to when movie cameras were first around, and trying to think of this guy's name who did a film called Nanook of the North, right? And that kind of opened my eyes to the realities of making filmmaking and some of the harshest conditions and how tough it is early on, and what kit you had. And then during the documentary filmmaking course, we were invited by our tutor to go to Sheffield, where every year they have an international documentary film festival, and we were going to see this guy called John Pilger. Now, I knew nothing about John Pilger, so I started going on YouTube to see who he was, and it turns out he used to be an Australian journalist, and he's become a writer and a multi-award-winning documentary filmmaker whose kind of basis and foundation for writing stories is the truth. And when it turns up at the evening in Sheffield, it was chocker, crammed. You couldn't get a seat. Standing room only. There must have been a few thousand people in this auditorium. And he started like this, getting interviewed by someone. He started talking about his life, his filmmaking, and basically he was one of these journalists. He went to Vietnam and started sharing the reality and the true facts about what was actually going on in Vietnam. And there was a bit of an uproar because during that period, people at home watching the tellies could see, remember that?
It's all propaganda, yeah.
You remember that girl running who was naked and on fire or burns, stuff like that. And that, for the people who run the gaff and run wars, they weren't happy about that because they want to control everything, including what you see, and can, and manipulate everything we think and do. I've discovered. So John Pilger, and he talks about an island in the South Pacific that was sold for a submarine, Diego Garcia, I think it's called. And he's, it was, I remember how it opened my eyes to a real, true, honest, intelligent, fact-finding journalist. Now, we haven't got that today. Okay, there's not many John Pilgers around because everyone's bought off and you have to toe the line. Otherwise, you don't get your job. Okay, same with musicians, etc. Same in business. Okay, so he suddenly opened the door for me to go exploring what it is he was talking about. Okay, and in 2008, it was a lot easier then to use YouTube as a platform to investigate stuff and listen to people give testimonies of their world, whether it was in Hollywood, the music industry, 101 different areas of interesting jobs, shall we say, and then share the realities of that. You can't do it now. And what I've noticed is if I post something on my Facebook page, it's stamped as fake news, okay? And when I have discussion with friends of mine, about certain stuff, the way I see certain things, see, I realise, Billy, right, that I've gone so far down the line that I've gone over the shock factor.
Yeah.
Okay? Now, I know through reading some, because when we did that couple of minutes podcast, I'm thinking, well, I wonder how that was received. I wonder what the thoughts were. Now, I had to laugh, right? Because there's about 8 or 10 which are all quite positive and saying, okay, get him on. Let's hear a bit more. Who is he? What's he talking about? Because I know now, over the past 10 years, there's more people who are awake about all the corruption that's going on, all the lies, all the seats, all the propaganda in lots of different areas. Okay. And I remember distinctly when I started my journey, I'd be looking into, for example, HIV and AIDS and the Freedom of Information Act. Okay. And it turns out that through that act, some bloke managed to discover that HIV was given to 50 to 70 million Africans by the World Health Authority and a Christian organisation with 60,000 gallons of it. That's a lot. And infected 50 to 70 million Africans. Okay? And it was made in Maryland in the USA at an army chemical war plant called Fort Detrick. Okay? Now, that might be hard to find now if people go on YouTube because it's all wiped out because it's harder because they've cottoned on those powers that be, that people are waking up. Yeah. And YouTube has been a platform for people to share stuff. But if it doesn't hold the narrative of what people want, it's fake news or it's off. So you know, it's difficult. And plus, plus while studying TV, you know, studying the mechanics in television, the frames per second, which you'll know about, right? It's, and then you'd understand how it's used as a propaganda machine.
Oh yeah, we all know that, don't we?
Well, my first introduction to propaganda is when I did a play called Accrington Palace, and it was sort of about the First World War. And my granddad, strangely enough, fought in the First World War, and he went on to have 12 kids, but he was gassed. And, you know, it brought home to me when I see the photo on the fireplace when he's in his uniform in France, that if he'd have died, obviously I wouldn't be here. I'd have no life. He'd have no kids. Yeah. But he survived that, and he was a sergeant, which is a miracle for me, knowing the stuff, you know, my interest in the First World War, and subsequently years later into history and events that took place and what impact they have, and, you know, the evidence to back it all up, blah, blah, blah. So propaganda, that was the first time I heard the word. I didn't understand what it meant because I was only a young 23-year-old. What's propaganda about? And in the play, they, you know, there was newspapers about the lads playing football, and everything was hunky-dory and rosy, and it was easy. But in reality, they had trench foot, and the conditions were terrible, and it was just your worst nightmare, horrendous. And Blackadder, to a certain degree, kind of shows that a little bit, I suppose. But so that was my intro to propaganda when I was 23. And then years later, I ended up going to university, meeting John Pilger. When I met John Pilger, actually, I met him afterwards, and I say to him, "How are you still alive? Because fellas like you get bumped off."
It's like the same as David Icke, though, isn't it? And Katie Hopkins, and, you know, people with similar, like, controversial views or out there allegations or conspiracies.
Well, see, that's people like me and hundreds like me. See, when you want to know the truth and the facts, and you start on a journey to discover that, some of the things you find out through the Freedom of Information Act, shall we say, and listening to people who, like, there's a guy, I've made a load of notes here, which I'm thinking that's a reference to, a guy called John Todd. Now, John Todd was the managing director of the biggest record company in the world, in America. And he starts talking about, I think he's dead now, but usually they get bumped off, right? He starts talking about the reality of what happens in the music industry. Talks about David Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, the satanic stuff that goes on, you know. And so what I must say this, Billy, is for anyone who's watching this who hasn't got a clue what I'm on about, you know, I say to people, well, don't believe me. Do spend your own time investigating stuff, if you can. To a degree, use YouTube, but you have to go on other platforms like Rumble, and there's a few other ones where you're not vetted, where you're not censored. Do you get me? Where you've got a certain freedom to share whatever video you want to share and talk about who you are and what stuff you found out. Do you get me? And, you know, my area of interest, sometimes I usually say, because I've spent so long on it, I have different themes. And when I would talk to someone, I would talk about AI, I'd talk about the Illuminati, I'd talk about Freemasonry, the Roman Catholic Church, Hollywood, the music industry, you know, David Icke, Alex Jones, Jordan Peterson, blah, 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 right? And I'll move on to George Foreman, Manny Pacquiao, and Tyson Fury in a minute, because I think that's, because I know you have because of your boxing background, and you have a boxing following, I'll mention them, you know, before we finish. So I've just been on a mission to get to the bottom of stuff. And what I forget now, because I've been at it for so long and I talk about certain things with people, I forget that some people, it's just massive shock when I'm saying to them, because it challenges, as it did in mine, my outlook on the world and the way things are. And it sounds so ridiculous and so off the Richter scale, people think, I just don't get what you're on about, okay? So, because, you know, I've become normalised to what I found out about what's going on with the World Economic Forum, the New World Order, the Georgia Guidestones, you know, adrenochrome, you know, the whole satanic dark stuff And I see, and plus, as I say, you're not allowed to say some of this stuff because one of the things is it goes against the narrative that we're all told, okay? And the people who run everything control everything. Science, universities, funding, the media particularly. So the upshot is this, Bill, right? So I go on a journey to get to the bottom of stuff because it's John Pilgett was the catalyst for me to investigate corruption. But what I found was I started looking into secret societies like the Bilderberg Group, the Club of Rome, Freemason, the Illuminati, the injustices in the world. Now, if you're part of the gang, as we'd say in Liverpool, you're barley because nothing can touch you. And I'll give you an example of that. In Princess Diana died, didn't she? And there was an article in the paper about a letter or something that she shared in the newspaper about how she was going to die, and describes it in a letter what her husband's going to do, and she ends up that's what happened to her. And then you've got Prince Andrew who's able to buy someone off, that girl off. So there's there's inconsistencies in terms of equality and justice, and if you're part of the gang, right? There's a great fella called Robert Bernard. Now, Robert Bernard was a banker for the rich and famous. He gives his testimony. I mean, I'll say this before I forget. I've got Facebook accounts, and I use Facebook as a platform to share stuff. Okay, occasionally I get a flag fake news, right? But what I found, what changed my life is listening to so many personal testimonies of people from different walks of life, like Robert Bernard. Now, Robert Bernard laundered money for the richest of the rich. And he'd say, go to an underground car park, and he'd have trucks full of money that he would launder for the rich and famous. And because he was doing what he was doing, he was exposed to their parties, okay? A bit like Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman call, is it Eyes Wide Shut?
Yeah.
Right, okay. Where, do you know who directed that?
Was it Oliver Stone?
Stanley Kubrick.
Stanley Kubrick.
Now, Stanley Kubrick also did 2001: A Space Odyssey. Okay, brilliant movie. And
Clockwork Orange.
So, and he's supposed to be involved in the fake moon landing films. Okay, there's stuff out there which show the setup. Okay, that he was supposed to be involved in. So we can see men landed on the moon. So there's a big conspiracy about that. But that's the last film he ever made. And he was assassinated, I believe, after that, because he had the audacity to show what really goes on in them worlds, in them parties, in the occult, in paganism. And if you look at the opening of the Geneva Tunnel a couple of years ago, which is the longest tunnel in the world, and what goes on, my brother rings me up and says, I can't believe what I'm looking at, because it's so pagan and it's so demonic. And the guy dressed up like Baphomet, like the goat, and having sex, and just nuts. Even some of the commentators on it, because he had a worldwide media coverage on it, were just gobsmacked at what they were witnessing. They had some of the biggest heads of state at this thing, and it's in your face, and they don't care anymore, right? So Stanley Kubrick makes Eyes Wide Shut. He gets assassinated because he got the audacity to show what's really going on in Hollywood. And there's a girl called Kathy O'Brien who was Bob Hope's sex slave as a child that he used to rent out to people, and she's got a testimony out there. So when you start listening to hundreds and hundreds of testimonies and investigators and scientists and filmmakers and authors and writers and stuff, because the only interest I have watching the telly is watching the news to see where they're up to with the propaganda and how the New World Order agenda is coming into place, and how they're still conditioning us. Because at university they teach you stuff about the set, about the lights, about the language they use, okay? And that was another thing for me which opened my eyes, was I did an assignment on the news. So certain events kind of started to fall into place. And plus my tutors would say to me, you do realise what's going on. Because he showed to me, when I had to compare and contrast lots of different news channels over a 24-hour period. And what I discovered was they were all reading the same script. Right? So he said, and I cottoned on, yeah, it's all a setup. It's all scripted. Okay. So if we know a lie to and propagandise, Billy, how big are the lies? What effect does it have on our lives? So that's all I started off to do, was to investigate. Well, what are the lies, and what are truths? Is there anything to back up the truths? Okay, and it took me. My testimony to being a born again Christian is simply this: I had a realization that God must exist because of all the satanic stuff that was going on in the secret societies, in Freemasonry, in Hollywood, okay, through the likes of Robert Bernard's testimony of parties, and he was invited to upscale his operations and make vast amounts of money if he could. He uses this expression, leaving his conscience in the fridge.
Yeah.
And because he was abused as a kid and he had to deal with that, he was able to ditch that experience in order to cope with life. So when the guy offered him an opportunity to do that, he said, no, I can do that. I can. Yeah. So he ends up kind of getting involved in money laundering, but then he's exposed to all these super parties and orgies and drugs. And then the next level was child abuse and murder and just nut stuff to do with kids. Okay. So for me, after I've just spent so long being shocked, by the way, and in a state of disbelief, because obviously it wrecks your own idea of what you think the world's like.
Yeah.
And plus you don't want to believe it, because it's so far off the Richter scale of how bad it is. But then there's the more, I might have mentioned it when I met you for the first time, all roads lead to Rome. And when you see enough of it, the penny drops. So the penny dropped for me, and plus I talk about our kid, what he does, part of his job. So I thought, well, God's got to exist. Okay, so I just do this, Billy. And I found out later on that that's what you do to find out about who God is and what the relevance is, what the importance is, what the value is, what the benefits are, which I now know through investigating. Because I don't want to be had off. I don't want to be kidded. When my friends or my family go, oh, we're just made up for you. It's something to believe in, isn't it? Because you've had a hard time and we know you're just making it up because you want to feel better. And I go, is that right? Everyone has hard times. Okay. It doesn't go away when you become a Christian, by the way. Okay. Because as someone made a comment of Ephesians 6 about, we don't wrestle against human stuff. We fight against invisible forces, the darkness, demonic stuff, okay, who hate me. Because I've got the audacity to take up the commission of God and go, you got to tell people what the score is. Got to tell me I love them and I died for them and they're going to meet me one day. And I go, and when I first started off at this, Billy, I was no good. And I put people off. And I do people's heads in. In fact, I still do a couple of people heads in. Some of them are in work or IT, right? Because you're not allowed to talk about God in work. Okay, you're not allowed to impose your belief system, right? But whereas years ago, our schools, some of the greatest philanthropists, our judicial system was based on scripture. It's based on the foundation of the Bible. Yeah. Okay, but now that's gone. Okay, so it's not easy to do this because people think you're mad. Like Martin Hughes, when Martin was on here talking about reading the Bible, I gave him it about a year ago. He was on a film set because he's just secure. I go, oh yeah, Martin, listen. Because what happens to old friends like Martin who I've known for 40 years? I'm a new Ged. I'm not the same Ged he knew. I believe you found Christianity, haven't you? And I go, yeah, Martin, yeah, have a look at that, lads. And Martin, what's great with Martin is a great reader and he's a deep thinker and he asks serious questions and he talks about being a Buddhist. And I love him and he's my mate. you know, and we're all going to die. And I say to everyone, don't believe a word I say. This is just my personal testimony, okay? And if you want to check it out, check out my Facebook page and do your own investigation. But what happened to me, Billy, was this. I knew for sure God had to exist because of how satanic the world was, and the hundreds and hundreds of personal testimonies of people who'd also died and got to heaven and hell. Okay, like there's a guy called Ian McCormick, same name as me. The Jellyfish Man is known as.
Yeah.
And there's lots of people out there on my Facebook page that have hung stuff of their personal testimony. There's a guy who's at the UN Assembly. I'll see if I can find his name here. Ian McCormick. Oh yeah. Do you know Jordan Peterson is?
I've heard of him, yeah.
Okay. He's a very popular psychologist.
Yeah.
Okay. And he's written books and
well chiseled face.
Yeah. He's become a Christian, right? And what's funny is my landlord, who's a mate of mine, he's been a big follower of him because he doesn't get it where I'm coming from, which is I get it. And I didn't get it. Anyone who talked to me, my first film was about me cousin, Jeff Fallows, who owned Fallows nightclubs. And I made a film for him called Prayer for Liverpool, which is on YouTube. And his mate done me head in. And Paul, his name is. Thank God for Paul. Paul saying to me, Jared, do you know Jesus Christ? And I'm like, that Billy, Paul, I'm sound, mate. I'm Catholic. I'm an alright fella. Don't do anyone any harm. I'm bound to get to heaven. I don't need you talking to me. And he was persistent. He's saying, no, but you know you need to be born again. I'm going like that, Paul, do us a favour, Jeff, have a word. Because he's done me head in. 7 years later, I'm in his mother's church, St. Mark's in Netherley, giving a testimony of how I knew God existed. I just found out. And when I rang her up, I was ringing her up about doing a follow-up to Prayer for Liverpool. And straight away I say to her, her name's Jane McKelvey, Reverend Jane McKelvey. She's retired now. And I go, Reverend Jane, listen, I've joined the club. I've stepped over the line. And she goes, what do you mean? And I go, I believe in God. And she says to me, are you taking the mick? Because that's the way I expressed it. And I go like that, no, I get it. You know, it's God's got to exist. So it's a light bulb moment. And then she says, will you come to my church and tell everyone what's happened to you? Where my bottle went down, because that's to stand up in front of people and talk. So I did. And as I'm giving me testimony, I said, her son done me head in. Because they're talking about Jesus Christ and God Almighty being born again and all of this. And I rebuked them. I told him to get off and leave me alone. And it took me 7 years, Billy. And I said, and he puts his hand up. He's sitting in the congregation. And I say to the people in the church, I say, what do you say to someone who's helped save your life? Okay, I said, because that fella who I couldn't stand was praying for me and was cared about my welfare. Now, I've turned into Paul, okay? And I feel like, talking about movies before filmmaking, you know who Mel Gibson is? He's done a film called A Passion of the Christ with Jim, it's not Cassavetes, Jim, whatever his name is, right?
Yeah,
and then he made another film called Hacksaw Ridge. Seen that?
Yep.
Boss movie. The guy who plays Batman plays this fella in it, who's a medic. And all the bullying he get and all based on a true story. So Mel Gibson's life changes where he decides he wants to make a film about Jesus Christ. And then another biblical story, not a biblical story, about a man who was he had a relationship with Jesus. And he made a film about a true story about him.
He played Spider-Man.
That's right, yeah. That's right.
Batman, yeah.
So, and there's a scene in the film where I think he rescued something like 75, 100 fellas. And it was a miracle he didn't get killed. And he even saved... because he has a love for preserving life, he even saved the life of the Japanese soldiers. He would give them medical assistance, and I think in the film as well, you meet the guy himself
at the end. Yeah.
But he had as he's lowering these fellas down the side, he goes back and he says, "Just one more, Lord." Right. So that's a mantra for me, that Billy, because till the day I die, I want to humbly do this, because as a Christian, you're supposed to be humble and meek, okay? But God's blessed me with a boldness to say to people, look, are you going to die one day? Because I try and witness with my wife as much as I can. And I pray that God gives me the words, because I've discovered that the world is evil, that the people who run it, the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers, and the gangs that worship Satan, right, and they lie to us, okay? So you got to, that's another thing. Kevin Spacey.
Yeah.
Okay. I've seen another clip and I'm like, thanks, Lord, for that. I'm going to tell him about that. So Kevin Spacey's been in the news lately, hasn't he?
I'm sure.
Kevin,
Recently.
yeah. Well, he was in court, wasn't he? Because of numerous cases of sexual assault and abuse and stuff. And what a surprise he got off. Right, so right. What a surprise, he's a big Hollywood actor, okay?
Yeah, but he's not no more, is he? He's been, like, moved on.
Well,
He hasn't been in nothing for a long time, Kevin Spacey, like. There was a bit of mud about him a few years back, and I think ever since he's been under the radar. I haven't really seen anything.
Well,
recently.
I've no interest in Kevin Spacey. I just believe he's one of the puppets and part of the gang, okay? And he thinks he can do what he wants, it seems, in terms of the way he behaves, like certain other people who I've mentioned earlier. But Kevin Spacey's in a film clip, right, when he's younger, and he says this, which is, I believe, blob on, which is the biggest lie the devil ever told is to convince the world he doesn't exist, okay? And that's the big lie, Billy, because when I lay on my bed in York looking at the ceiling, and I knew that God knew that I knew he existed. So I'm laughing at the ceiling and I go like that, I know you can hear me. Do us a favour, God. Send me proof that I'm not just talking to the ceiling. And then all of a dirty black pudding, all of a sudden, people started coming into my life who I'd never met before, who'd all had supernatural encounters. So I had a personal meeting with these people. And one of them is a guy I made a film about called Andrew Cannon. Now, if you go on YouTube and type in Andrew Cannon's now a Scouse international travelling evangelist, okay? And he goes, travels around the world, sharing what happened to him. Because Andrew was became an alcoholic and a cocaine addict and a self-harmer. And I first met him when God created, I believe, a series of events that would start opening me to people's supernatural stories and meeting people like Stephen French, for example. So Andrew Cannon, I'm in a tent with another fella called Alan Field. I'll tell you about him in a minute. Alan Field, and I'm waiting for this guy to come along to give a testimony. And as some young lad gets up to do some praying and talking, this fella's in the front and he's going, "Come Ed, go Ed, hallelujah." And we're all sitting there like that. And I'm looking and I'm thinking, he's got Tourette's, that fella. He can't keep still. That was Andrew Cannon. It was him we had come to hear. And he gave his testimony of how he became a cocaine addict. And for 10 years was a cocaine addict and spent a colossal amount of money on cocaine, and it ruined his life. And he tried to kill himself. And he tried to kill himself by drinking half a bottle of vodka and got a kitchen knife and lashed it into his chest. Missed his heart, but almost bled to death. And then he survived it. And then a couple of days later, he meets a mate of his who he hadn't seen for months. Okay. And he stood at the traffic light and he said, "I'm like that, really skinny and grey." And a car stops and some fellow winds the window down and shouts, "Andy!" And he's like that, "Oh, who's that? Who's that?" Paranoid that he's that a drug dealer I owe money to and I'm going to get kidnapped, right? Because he's just paranoid. And he didn't recognise the fella. And the guy goes, "Andy, it's me, it's Brendan." And he thinks, "I only know I'm Brendan." But he doesn't recognise him because he looked great. And Brendan goes, "Andy, I've got something to tell you. It might make sense," he said, "but I'm not a cocaine addict anymore. I'm not a gambler. And I'm not an alcoholic. I've been saved by Jesus Christ." And Andy goes, "You are?" And he goes, "Yeah, I thought so." Next thing, the light changed. Beep, beep, off he's gone. And Andy sees the car take off and says to himself, "I want what gear he's on, right? Because he looks great." And 2 days later, Brendan's mother turns up with a phone number of the Lighthouse Foundation in Widnes where this event happened to him. And in my film that I make with Andy, I film and sharing his testimony in Stoke. I go to his house. I film him on the streets in St Helens with his board saying, "Anyone want a prayer for anything?" You know, and to show how his life changed and what he does now. And then we goes to the Lighthouse, And what's interesting for me in him is we can go to the very spot where he had a supernatural encounter, and he said, this is how it goes. He said, I'm in there 3 days, and all these other lads who like me, drug addicts, are all talking about this God that transformed their lives. He said, I knew it was real because of their personal testimonies. It's real. You know, I get it. It's tangible was the word he used. And then he said, one day I'm in this room with about 6 fellas, and Ian, who runs it, walks in and goes, there's someone here wants to give themselves to Jesus. Who is it? And Andy says, I knew nothing about Jesus.
Yeah.
No religious education, knew nothing about the Holy Spirit, knew nothing about God, knew nothing. Read the Bible, 15 minutes a day for 3 days, meant nothing to me. And he said, and he remembered Brendan. So he goes like that, yeah, that's me. And he stood there and he goes, Jesus, if you're real, save me and set me free. As soon as he said the word free, whack, he starts shaking violently, right? And then he starts describing the feeling and what was going on in his body, from this warm, powerful sensation that's moving down his body and shaking his body. And he's like this going, oh, as it's moving. And it's purging him of all his addictions and self-harm, right? And Ian, who's facing him, saying, that's it. And Andy's going, what's it? I don't know what that it is. And he said, I can feel all his hands on me, and he opens his eyes and there's no one there. And he said, by the time this energy had reached his feet, he was completely transformed. Yeah. So he believes, and I believe, that's the power of the Holy Spirit just kind of whacking him.
Yeah, but he believes, and you believe, and what our audience will believe is going to be a different thing.
Oh, of course.
You know,
of course.
You know as well as me, yeah, that there's going to be a lot of comments here going, this is a bit biblical, this is a bit Christian, this is a bit...
I'd expect that, Billy.
Yeah, and I get it. And I understand people's experiences are different, and my experience is different from your experience. Yeah. And, you know, someone out there watching this is going to be thinking, what the fuck has Billy got there, and what's he doing, and this, that, the other.
Yeah.
Right, I'm here, real people, real stories, real lives, right? And if it's changed your life, and it's changed your outlook, and it's changed Andrew's life and everyone else's, then that's good. I know you spoke about him being a cocaine addict, and you spoke about him, you know, ready to fucking end it, basically, you know what I mean? I've been in that place many, many times, and it says in these cards that I read that we sought help through medication, religion, psychiatry, and fucking everything else, you know what I mean? And I had actually sought help in all those areas, religion, psychiatry, medication, until I found what worked for me, and that's identifying and relating with people who I can call predecessors, who have been there and walked that path before me, and Bill, look, there's a way out here, you don't have to go down that road. Because I've had that one where I've been to meetings and I've gone, right, you know, God done this. I had a sponsor once. I'll tell you about it. I had a sponsor, and I was sponsored as someone who's been there before you, who's got a few years under his belt in recovery. He's there to kind of like guide you, basically. But he was talking about God to me all the time now. Fucking mate, I was like,
done your head in.
He said to me, Bill, you need to get on your knees, you need to pray. And I was thinking, why do I need to get on my knees? Why do I need to pray? Why does he feel this fucking overpowering need to push this down my throat? We ended up getting rid of him, right?
Yeah.
Which, to be fair, was the best thing I did, because I moved on and I kind of understood like what higher powers were to me, and how I feel. And I feel it's like, you know, like yourself, it's got to be tangible.
Yeah.
It's got to be visible, and I see it in just like people. You know, there's people there that, you know, you call it divine intervention, you call it what you want, but you'll be in that, you'll be on that path, and it's mad the way it always has been. It's mapped out. You know what I mean? When you hit rock bottom, and there's someone extending the hand of help, and they're reaching out and they're helping you up. Because I remember going to a meeting and someone said to me, and I was in fucking Taiwan, and I couldn't understand the language. And I'm in recovery, and I don't want to use drugs, so go to this Narcotics Anonymous meeting, which I think it's a Narcotics Anonymous meeting. I couldn't fucking understand what was getting said, and it wasn't. It was an AA meeting, which I don't go to, right? Because when I came out, the girl I was with, the Chinese girl who had met in Bournemouth, flew over to Taiwan to escape fucking life and live with for a bit, said, "You're nothing but a drunk." I went, "What?" She said, "There, Alcoholics Anonymous, because obviously it translates as that.
Yeah.
And I felt embarrassed and ashamed, right, of where it went, and you know, the fact that I'd kind of like not being sort of loyal to this fellowship, this other one. Found myself sitting in this, like, not like meaning to. And my mate went to me, listen lad, right, I want to tell you something now, right? He said, if you're falling off a cliff, right, he said, and you're reaching out for help, right, and you're screaming for it, he said, do you think someone's going to come to you and go, hang on a minute mate, are you in NA or AA first? Because if you're in AA, you know, you're on your own, or you're, you know, so it was like, it didn't really matter, right, where I went, and I've come to understand that it doesn't matter, as long as, like, there's a, you know, you mean well, right, so I understand what's going to be, like, said on these comments, because they can be a little bit hard and harsh.
Oh, I've read some of them, Billy.
Yeah, you know,
and
you're going to get the Ged's mad.
Of course.
You're going to get him.
No,
he's mad. Bill, he's on a bench.
Well,
and you're going to get people who go, you know, he's speaking the truth, and you know, we need to hear more.
Well,
it's very ambivalent.
There's a mixed bag.
Yeah.
Okay. And I get that. I mean, I did read some of the you know, the ones who were saying he's off his head, and I get that because Billy. And I was in the same boat not so long ago. Anyone who starts talking about Jesus or God or what, I go, look, do you mind? Yeah. Because I'm not interested.
Yeah,
and I rebuke it. And it didn't make sense to me. Yeah. And as we're just saying, it's got to be real for you.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I know people will switch off straight away. So what happened to... Well, I was quite curious as to what you were going on about Manny Pacquiao, because there was some... Like,
oh, yeah.
For some reason, I was like... You talked about, like George Foreman, and then you mentioned Pacquiao. I was like,
and Tyson Fury.
So, what's the three people going?
See, now as with Martin Hughes, with me, there are certain, as you go through life, things happen like they have done to me. I've found another world that existed, didn't know existed. My testimony is going down corruption, Satanism, Anton LaVey, or you know, all the bad stuff. Okay, secret societies. And the common thread with all of them was they all worship the devil and usually abuse children, okay? And plus my brother deals with some of that stuff, okay? So that's my personal testimony. And then I discover, I mean, I have to laugh. Tyson Fury, George Foreman and Manny Pacquiao are all born-again Christians, okay? And when Tyson Fury, what I love about him, I you know, I have a little bit of an interest in boxing. And I love the fact that he's very bold, and he'll acknowledge who Jesus is. He wears a cap now because he realises as soon as you start opening your mouth, start mentioning Jesus' name, you're cut off, because the people in the world don't want you to talk about Jesus Christ. And I mentioned Kevin Spacey. The biggest lie the devil ever told is convince the world it doesn't exist. So for me, that's the big lie. I was going to hell, Billy, and didn't know it. I'm just grateful that God has revealed himself to me. I've had 2 serious road traffic accidents and nearly died. And I'd have gone to hell, mate. And there's a video on YouTube called 23 Minutes in Hell, okay, which is about a guy who ends up there. There's tons of videos of people who've died. There's one fella I put on my YouTube. He's in the UN Assembly talking about he was dead for 45 minutes. Okay, so I believe this, that once you kind of have... Once you're curious, once you want to know more, once you have a hunger for understanding, okay, because we all need wisdom, knowledge and understanding, and once you go on that path to get to the bottom of stuff, whether it's what's Christianity about, who's Jesus, what's the supernatural, what it is that he's on about, okay, what I would suggest to people, call out to God, because God knows where everyone's up to, and they're understanding the knowledge on the way to the grave, okay, and I'm commanded to do this, Bill. I haven't got a choice. And I do feel like I'm standing on the gangplank of people getting on the Titanic going, kidder, you don't want to get on that. That's going to sink. And they go, well, you're on about the safest ship in the world. So I didn't know how much I'd been deceived, and I didn't know the consequences of that, right? And I'm just a curious guy who God's blessed with a degree of intelligence and, with a hunger to know the truth. And I grew up in a tough city. And I've travelled a lot, and I've asked a lot of questions, and I've done... University teaches you to research stuff, okay? Yeah. And I go to Africa, okay? I've been going to Africa on and off since 2010, making films for the Africa Lands Trust, go on the web and have a look at some of the films. And the guy who, I'm very fortunate the fact that as a volunteer, I get to meet some interesting people and interview some of them.
Yeah.
Okay. And Dave, who's the guy who runs the charity, Stephen French met Dave Maiden, this fella's name is. And I remember Stephen's reaction was on the lines of, how fellas like you, I didn't know fellas like you still existed, because this guy has dedicated his whole life to helping the poorest of the poor, and he wants to turn the slave route into a trade route. And Liverpool's got its link to slavery, made its fortune on slavery. And I'm trying to use film as a tool to help this guy change the lives of huge communities, right? So that's one thing I've been doing for a few years now. But I believe, I want to humbly say to people, don't believe me, check it out for yourself. Yeah. Don't take the chance before you die that if heaven and hell's real, because one of the biggest lies is the devil and the world. People don't know the hell and heaven is real. They can think I'm mad, they can think I'm nuts. I don't care. It's not about my feelings. It's about my love for my fellow mankind. And the fact that we're being had off. And I'm fuming because I've realised how much I was being had off and the consequences of it. And I'm angry, because who likes to be had off, Billy? So I'm just grateful that I've had this revelation of another world. And the people I follow, a lot of them are on my Facebook page, have blown my mind, mate. And it is another world, and it is difficult to kind of share with them, because we're being conditioned through the media and the people who run everything and deceiving us. So it won't make sense to people, some of the stuff I'm talking about, because they haven't done what I've done. And I don't want to argue with them. I've got friends of mine who've got degrees and call themselves scientists, and they don't get it. And they want to slag me off, some of them.
But not everyone's going to get it, and it's like, it is it's that saying, it is what it is for others.
But, how can I put it? I'm a sensitive guy, Billy.
Yeah.
I hate bullies. Okay, I've experienced bullying. I hate people who take advantage of people. I hate being had off. I hate understanding that we're lied to and understanding the consequences of them lies and how it impacts our lives. Yeah. The world's a very, very difficult place to live in at the moment.
Yeah, I agree on most things as well, Jed, with especially media stuff. And how we're exposed, like our children are exposed to a lot more these days than we were, right? They've got, like, my little boy's like, he's 3 and he's talking about TikTok and YouTube and he's watching like jump scares. Now the scariest movie I ever watched as a kid was fucking hell, what was that? It was
Wasn't the
Evil Ged.
All right, okay.
It was the Exorcist was probably the scariest, but that between that and the Evil Ged, and like that now was like a cartoon. You know what I mean? It's very cartoonish, but back then, that kind of stuff we weren't exposed.
Mm-hmm.
But now we're exposed to a lot of things, and it's
funny, that, isn't it?
We're quite it's fucking not that funny, mate. It's the world has flew so quick by with technology and internet and what have you,
and darkness, Billy.
Yeah, I believe that's to be true. And journalism, can be a bit dark as well, but some.
Well, I believe a lot of them are just hired to say what, to follow a certain script and narrative. Otherwise, you haven't got a job.
No.
And, there are a few journalists out there who come out saying, listen, I used to be like that, but now my conscience won't let me carry on anymore.
Well, there's like David Lazar. Is it David Lazar? Have you ever heard of him, Lazar? The UFO conspiracies, and, he actually worked for the government, and then he's done an interview with Joe Rogan, and he spoke about everything. Done it like years ago. We outed everyone and saying that there was aliens. There was aliens, this, that, and the other. And Bob Lazar, and I watched that interview, and then I watched it on Netflix, and I was like, fuck, this fella is convincing. He is convincing. And what was not so convincing was what you said earlier on. Why isn't he being wiped out? And is it because then the conspiracy kicks in, and they keep him alive so people think he's fucking nuts, right? And they'll dismiss him. Because if they did stop him, then it'd be like a justified kind of reason to believe him. So it was a flip of the coin, isn't it? Really, you know.
Well, what about Epstein? Remember him?
Epstein?
Yeah, he was going to let the cat out the bag, it seems, and he's bumped off, isn't he? It seems.
Harvey Weinstein.
Yeah.
What happened to Epstein's co-accused? What was her name?
Ghislaine Maxwell.
Yeah, no, she's just gone right off the map.
Yeah.
You know, you heard nothing. You know, not a peep out of him. Epstein, he knew he was going to his island. The likes of Trump, fucking, you know, the Prince of fucking what have you. All that shit was going on.
So there's, as we know, there's a lot of hush and cover up, isn't he? And what's inside most, and plus we're bombarded with stuff, aren't we? And we get normalised to it, Billy, where we just think, you know, when you speak to the average Joe on the street, they say, oh yeah, they're all corrupt, but it's just like an acceptance of it, if you like. And but you know, and a lot of people say, well, what can you do about it? Okay. And that's true. What can you do about it?
Fucking phone them up, because I know I do.
Well.
I tell you what, mate, right? I know social media, right, can be a minefield, right? And people who follow you, next thing you get, you know, you get a massive following, and you know, I get a few snide comments. But what I do, right, and the people who watch this who've been called up by me, you know, the fucking score, I'll ring them, because now you can ring them up on your Insta.
All right, okay.
And I give them a piece of my mind, you know what I mean? Is the answer, and I shouldn't, because I buy into the power. I give over my power, you know what I mean? And I've kind of got to an understanding now where you mentioned it before, when I feel sensitive, then that's when I'm at my most vulnerable. Right, so when I'm sensitive, I'm really vulnerable, and I pick up the phone and I say things you shouldn't say, and you know, then I feel, fucking hell, you wasn't really adult about what you said there, and you know, then I feel a need to apologise, even though they've been abusive to me, and I think, no, I'm not apologising for them being abusive to me, I'm apologising for my fucking part in my behaviour, and that's what I, and you know, if I've upset anyone, then I need to apologise.
Well, listen,
you know,
we all make mistakes. I'm a sinner like everyone else, Billy, and but I try to sin less. Okay, from my understanding of what it is to be a Christian. Okay, I have to be an example to the world. I'm not always an example to the world. I fall over. Okay, but I have a desire not to be angry or unforgiving or unloving, right, or judgmental. Okay, so. But it's not always easy, because I'm human and I make mistakes. But I suppose the difference is I recognise it, and I do ask God to forgive me, because everyone's work in motion and I'm no different, really. Are you getting a sense to wrap up now?
Yeah, because I've got a question that I've got to ask you at the end, right?
Okay.
I always ask, you know, every guest, right? Because I know we're running out of time. That's why I'm clocking the camera.
Right. Okay.
Right, so at the end of every podcast, I asked the guest, and I think you said enough, to be fair, any pearls of wisdom, what would you say, right, to a young Ged McCormick coming through the doors of life? If you had an opportunity to speak to yourself now, right, and I think I know what you're going to say, to be fair, but if you had an opportunity to say something to yourself, what would you tell? What guidance, what would you offer yourself, Ged?
That's a brilliant question, by the way. Seek truth, seek wisdom, seek understanding. Understand that the world that we live in ain't honest, ain't truthful. Okay,
definitely.
And is there an afterlife? You know, does heaven and hell exist? Is the God and the devil real? You know, is there a battle for your life going on? Is there only one fella in the world who said, I'm the way, the truth and the life? Because Buddha didn't say it, Muhammad didn't say it. And if this guy's wrong, he's a liar, right? Or he's mentally ill, or he's telling the truth, as Nicky Gumbel once found out, this barrister. So life's short, okay? We should love one another. We should forgive one another. We should be unselfish. We should be kind. We should, you know, if we love one another, the world will be a better place, right? But don't believe a word that I say. But I would encourage people to see what truth is.
That's it. Brilliant. And thanks for that, Jed. And thanks for your time.
My
And
pleasure.
I'll put all your information, like your Facebook profile and whatever social media platform you've got, in the description. So if anyone wants to go and search you and check it out, your YouTube channel. And
Well, it's not YouTube, it's my Facebook account where, and you know, I'd only ask people, for those who don't get it and understand, you
well,
know,
I'll put your links in and you can get on your card, and then that's the best.
yeah.
Would you answer them?
Well, see, I live a very busy life, Billy, and I ain't got the time, and I don't want to get into debates. I just want to say to people, look, don't believe me. This is just my personal testimony, and I just want to love people and say there's a battle for your soul and your mind. Don't believe me, check it out.
And we love you, lad. Thanks for your time.
God bless.